Okay, hello everyone. I see that already a lot of the guests are coming in. I think our live stream on YouTube has started already, so it's probably good to get started. Thanks a lot for joining in this conversation we're going to have for approximately 2 hours today on the Central and Eastern European perspective on the EU's quest to improve the competitiveness of its economy and of its industries. And what we're hoping to have is an informed debate about the regional impact of all the measures that we are expecting at EU level, both when it comes to reviving the industrial base, but also improving the access to affordable energy. We're doing this in this format as a continuation of some efforts that EPG has been pursuing in the past few years together with a lot of think tank partners, some of which are already in the call with us here today as well. In which we've been trying basically to coordinate on what is happening, essentially European countries when it comes to industrial decarbonization, and also what are the reactions to the EU level policy making. One of our concerns, I think, is that at times the importance that industry has in Central and Eastern Europe is overlooked. Not only there is a rich tradition, for example, Czechia and Poland have industrial clusters that are more than a century and a half old, but also there's still a significant industrial base in steel, cement, chemicals, petrochemicals in the region, slightly moving into the clean tech space as well. Now, something that's very important is that we think of the economies in Central and Eastern Europe as relatively smaller compared to some other member states, yet they are incredibly industrialized. So in places like Czechia, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia, the percentage of GVA in the total economic output is higher than in Germany, for example. The same for employment. So places where industry really matters a lot. There's anything that happens to the industry has linkages to job security and to welfare. The problem is that over the past couple of years, during the energy crisis, the industrial base of CE has really struggled with the high energy prices, and we've seen a downturn in output. And we're in the middle of trying to figure out, as a union, but also within the national capitals, how we can revive the industrial production in those places. Our slight concern, which is also why we want to have this regional format, is that the focus that we've seen so far on state aid creates the risk that industry thrives in the countries that have the largest fiscal space to provide subsidies, which we don't think is sustainable on the long term, but has very immediate short-term implications for the functionality of the single market. So part of our efforts are also to try to avoid the risk of a two-speed transition in Europe and level the playing field for Central and Eastern European countries as well. We're speaking today right 1 week before the Clean Industrial Deal will come out. I'm sure everyone that's here has seen one version or the other of the leaks. What's clear so far is that the document will try to tackle 3 challenges at once: that of climate, competitiveness, and economic resilience, but it puts forward a commitment to accelerate decarbonization and reindustrialize at the same time. I think that's a good starting point for our discussion going forward. We'll get to speak about each of the key priorities it identified in the Clean Industrial Deal leaks that we've all been seeing. But what is clear is that the Commission is trying to send a clear business incentive to decarbonize within Europe. Of course, sometimes speaking about decarbonization in these trying geopolitical times can be challenging, and especially when the industrial base is facing very immediate grave issues with affordability of energy. But I hope we have a chance today to discuss frankly and honestly about what the situation is in Central and Eastern Europe, what needs to be done, and whether what we expect to see coming from Brussels will address some of those problems. Before I shut up, sorry for taking so long, I'm going to walk you a bit through the structure of the webinar. We have a slight change compared to what was shared on social media. Apologies for that. We're going to start with a conversation with the member of the European Parliament, Mr. Radan Kanev, together with my colleague, Nadia Maki. Then we're going to move into a panel discussion in which we're going to discuss with a few think tank colleagues, with Yanis Wolbert, Benjamin Haig, and Alexandra Waliewska. I'm going to present them when we have that discussion then. And after, Luciana Miu, my colleague, the head of the Clean Economy Department at EPG, will give a presentation about regional coordination on industrial decarbonization in CE. And then in the final part, we will move to a discussion with Mr. Florin Spataru, former Minister of Economy of Romania and currently State Councillor in the Chancellery of the Prime Minister, who unfortunately was supposed to be in the conversation that we're just about to start, but because of another last-minute commitment, we had to move that part at the very end. Just some very basic housekeeping rules before we start. So this event is public, so it's not Chatham House, nothing like that. The registration was open to everyone, but there's also a simultaneous YouTube live stream for everyone else. The advantage for participants that have registered and that are with us today in the Zoom link is that they can put questions. But for that, I will kindly ask you to use the Q&A function. Ask speakers questions, keep them concise and clear. You can submit them throughout the event, and the moderators will pick them up and present them to the different speakers. Just please make sure that you mention to whom your question is addressed and what your organization is. That can also be helpful to understand where your perspective is coming from. With that being said, I think I've spoken already more than my allocated time, so I'd like to give the floor to my colleague Nadia Maki, who's a senior researcher in our energy team, to open up the discussions with Mr. Radan Kanev.
Hi, Mihna. Thank you very much for that introduction. Today's discussion will focus on increasing the competitiveness of Central and Eastern European countries in the context of the energy transition. Businesses are grappling with soaring energy costs, which are especially high in Central and Eastern Europe. And our reliance on imported hydrocarbons exposes us to price shocks and geopolitical instability. My upcoming discussion will explore how these challenges uniquely affect Central and Eastern European countries and how we can ensure industry maintains its competitive edge during decarbonization. We are joined today by Mr. Radan Kanev, a member of European Parliament. He served on the Committee on the Environment, Climate and Food Safety, and previously served as a member of the National Assembly in Bulgaria. Mr. Kanev, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Great, let's jump right in. So just to get us started, I'd like to ask your view of what the biggest challenges facing industry within CEE countries are right now.
I think because I'm taking part in really numerous panels the last week, and we have a very intense weekly agenda of both the environmental and also the industry and energy committee in the European Parliament. And my overall feeling is we are missing something. We are living in a different world for a week now. And it is an awful cliche to say it, but this time I'm afraid the cliche is true. We are living in security emergency, especially in the east of Europe, which means we are not, I would say, mentally allowed to have more than one priority, which is the defense capabilities as countries and as a union. And here we all know there is no defense, no security without a robust industry, both heavy industry and new technologies in the world we live in which cybersecurity is as important as physical security. So I think the answer should be very, very obvious. It's everything from budgets to technologies to financial industrial models to decarbonization, if any. In my point of view, yes, it's needed to go on this path. But from another perspective, facing another priorities, everything should be subdued to the matter of defense, and I assume it will be lasting at least for the term of these European institutions. So the next 5 years, we shouldn't expect that a lot will be changed, because if something will be dramatically changed from that perspective, it will be for the worse. If we don't need our common security, it will be because we don't need it anymore, because it's too late to have it. So hopefully that's not the scenario. This means we really need to think in another paradigm, the one where the lead markets of defense and security are providing for jobs, for GDP, and for overall social resilience. By the way, that's a model that Poland is showing quite well for more than a decade now, and that the Scandinavian states have been showing forever. So we must keep in mind that the states with the most robust social system in the world are the ones with the highest GDP per capita for defense in Europe. No contradiction here, because in Southeastern Europe, we very often think of butter or weapons, but that's not the right question, and we have to change a bit of industrial paradigm. And just to not speak too much, sorry, it took a bit more, but my biggest worry is that at least in the leaks we see, there is no change around such priorities in the, for example, clean industrial deal. But we don't know how old this leak we are reading is. I hope it's old enough, and we'll see another document in a week time.
Thank you so much. I agree that, Europe is starting to juggle more and more priorities, and they are becoming increasing in importance altogether at the same time. I'm glad that you brought up the clean industrial deal. That's my next question. It'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts on what's important for the Commission to get right and your expectations for it coming up.
The clean industrial deal must its purpose provide the industrial side of the Green Deal. My opinion, not last week, as I said, in this new world we are living, but for more than a year now, is that the Green Deal never happened. The Green Deal, as promised in 2019, early 2020, was a comprehensive industrial strategy for development, jobs, breakthrough innovations. And it was promised by the Commission with a financial envelope of around 1 trillion euros. Then we had COVID, then we had inflation and war. We ended up with the Recovery and Resilience Facility with roughly 300 billion euros for climate policies at all, not a special envelope for industrial transformation. And if we look at the national implementation of the RRF, we can see that really a tiny portion of the RRF money went to the industry, if any, because Bulgaria is, for example, the zero example. We have a very bad implementation of the Green Deal of the RRF at all. A very modest success in investing the money so far. But if you look at the plan itself, there is more or less zero money for industrial decarbonization and transformation. So as a financial package, as a new deal, because you remember it was the Green New Deal at first, and New Deal means a lot of public money triggering private investment with them. The Green Deal never happened, and the Clean Industrial Deal should be the continuation, the severely delayed continuation of the Green Deal from financial perspective. Looking once again not only to the leaks, because leaks are leaks, but to what Commission officials are speaking, it won't happen once again. There is no financial envelope, no real financial envelope for industrial decarbonization. As I said to a completely different crowd of industries the day before, it was like the Google type, not really from Southeastern Europe. 22 pages of the Clean Industrial Deal is too short to be an industrial policy strategy, but it's far too much to say there's no money. It could have been said really in a briefer way.
Thank you. I'm curious, how much of this do you think, how much of the decarbonization for industry needs to come from an EU level, and what should remain at a national level?
If we think more pragmatically, we could say it's on the business level, it's on the industry level. The main decisions could only be successfully taken at corporate level, because if you want to transform a big steel plant to make it net zero by 2050 or by 2035 or whatever, first, the decision how should be taken by the owners and the shareholders, because it's a very, very difficult question how you will position on the market during the transition, after the transition. But then comes the question, where is the energy, for example, to electrify a big steel plant? Because for smaller ones, we also already see successful examples. But if it's a big one, the mere quantity of electricity supply will be unimaginable for the region normally. So we need a new energy infrastructure leading to the industrial region or cluster usually, which is already very much linked to the competencies of the public authorities. And we will need also the steady supply of affordable energy 24/7, which is once again a question that affects national authorities, regional authorities, and energy producers, energy business. So far, the European Union is not involved whatsoever, except for putting the targets for decarbonization. But of course, when we speak of financing of such a process, which is not economically beneficial necessarily by itself, here we need significant assistance on European level. I see many colleagues from the north of Europe, so-called rich or frugal countries, trying to close their eyes as much as possible. But I guess it's very much valid for their member states as well. We need the financial model to do it, which is obviously not someone from Brussels paying 100% with grants. But state aid is certainly not the answer. We can speak a lot about that. Maybe it's one of your next questions, I assume. But my conviction is we need a significant amount of direct EU budget investments, and we need a very clear and strong EU-level financial instruments design that we don't have for the moment. I'm afraid that I listened to Draghi yesterday as well quite carefully. The Commission starts to mention less often the Capital Markets Union, and it is absolutely crucial. It's a project that was crucial 14 years ago when we started talking about it, and it's much more important now.
Thank you. That is a really good point. I'm actually going to jump to one of my other questions because you brought up state aid. Now, we know that if we leave funding for industrial decarbonization down to the member states, the competitive advantage that some of the kind of Western European countries have already had could be exacerbated. And these kind of clusters that have already been produced, for example, in Germany, will only become more and more powerful if we don't have some kind of recycling component here. So, I mean, there are some things that we can do about this, right? There's new money from a multi-annual financial framework that could allow for maybe a more competitive fund to target poor states. Is this enough? Would be more, I guess, restrictive with state aid, give CE countries a greater chance?
Well, so first, I would say that the biggest problem of state aid is not even from our country's perspective, the fact that we don't have the fiscal space. And it will put us in a rather difficult position. It is, of course, a very obvious problem. It could like increase the inequalities. It will, frankly, increase the inequalities within the union. It will probably raise anti-European feelings in Eastern and Central Europe even higher. And we see that our region is most vulnerable to both hybrid attacks, but also, I would say, authentic, generic feelings that we are somehow not equally treated within the union. This will be exacerbated. That's more than clear. But I would say that the main problem is, especially in the new security situation, that we are considering European policies, European needs, and a whole new European industrial model that we need, with very strong new let's say industrial alliances, distribution of efforts among different regions and member states, regional cooperation. And when it comes to industry from the defense and security point of view, it should be a fully joint project. Because the question is not whether Romania could spend enough to protect itself against Russia. We know the answer. We know why we joined NATO and were so enthusiastic 25 years ago to do it, because we know we cannot. And Romania is still quite bigger than Bulgaria as a country. So we need a very strong common effort. And how do we organize a common effort with national budget money? It doesn't work like this. We can speak a lot about it, but at the end of the day, practically, when you spend public money, when you take national loans to increase your budget on industry, on security, you take obligations on behalf of your taxpayers, on behalf of their children. You're absolutely politically obliged to account for this money that they create jobs in your state and in your state only. That's the problem. So if we don't have a common financial envelope, we won't have a common industrial and security policy. But you know, it's written by Alexander Hamilton some 200 something years ago. It's not my thought. I'm not that clever. It was already said.
Thank you very much. Just a quick reminder before we wrap up that there is still an option for Q&A if anybody wants to ask any questions in the chat. Perhaps I'll go to a question of mine, actually. Since we're talking about these kind of joint priorities of increased defense spending, as well as the same time as needing to decarbonize, we've talked about this a little bit, but can you pull out maybe a bit more of the tensions there? I know it's only been a week since we're in this new world. So with that caveat, what are the tensions there? And perhaps, is there an opportunity for defense spending to maybe trigger some, I guess, some new demand?
Yes, of course, but it's not a question that we reflect on for the last week. It's a question we reflect on for at least 1 year now, or a bit more. So there are many answers. Truth is, we need decarbonization not only because we are going to save the planet, because from the election of Donald Trump for his second term, the Paris Agreement is certainly compromised. We know it, and we should tell it. I think honesty is something lacking in policy lately, unfortunately. You cannot have the Paris Agreement goals achieved without the full cooperation of the United States. It's not enough, but it gives chance to press the other big industrial players to take part of it, which puts the general question, do we need decarbonization at all, very acutely? And a lot of populists saying just get rid of that become strong because they sound very truthful. And here we must say decarbonization for Europe is a matter of economic security generally, because we are lacking the carbon product that we need in order to sustain our industry as it is. In most of Europe, we have zero production of oil and gas. In some countries, we have rather small quantities. We have some frozen projects, but even if everything goes on 100%, it won't cover more than 20% of our needs. And it's about gas, about oil, it's a bit worse. Which means that in peacetime, it's very beneficial for us to decarbonize. It's a very good strategy to decarbonize, not at the expense of industry per se, not necessarily with very strong targets on full decarbonization, because they are rather not realistic. And then let's think of it, same thing in war times. Worst thing possible in war is to be far and away of your energy supplies, because you need them for industry, for transport, for everything. And here, decarbonization becomes even more acutely needed, because then the price is not so important. In time of security crisis, you can pay any price for the energy you need in order to survive, which means we have to develop a lot of solutions that now we think are not economically viable. E-fuels, all kinds of alternative fuels. We don't make a lot on them because we say they will always be so expensive. Yes, maybe yes, and we might still need them. Energy storage will be of absolute importance, much bigger importance than in peacetime. But it's very important in peacetime. So what does it mean for us? It means we gotta be really crazy to not invest as much as we can in energy storage. Green steel. Green steel is much more local as supply chain than the traditional production. Yet another example, and I can give much more.
I found that very useful. Thank you so much. Before we wrap up, I'm going to avail ourselves of your time for just a little bit longer to ask maybe a question from our Q&A.
No problem, of course.
How will the EU navigate its relationship with China on clean tech now that the US is growing kind of more hostile and transactional when it comes to trade?
You know, I wouldn't change much here, because the Chinese, they have showed well enough the way they understand international partnership. The problem that Donald Trump's administration seems to follow the same path doesn't make Chinese friends or trusted partners. Not at all. The way that their discourse is, I would say, historically much more civilized than the Trump type, doesn't change the essence of their priorities and way of thinking. So it's Europe that needs to change its way of thinking, not to abide to China's or America's. We need to understand that being the champion of free trade was a very nice thing to have for many years. But in a situation where free trade simply doesn't exist, we need, of course, to expand as much as we could with trusted partners. But we need also to elaborate all our instruments to protect ourselves. We need to think a bit more protectionist. And believe me, it's a very painful thing for me to say. I have never been politically the champion of protectionist measures. But we need to have everything in mind. And here I would like to say another thing. We are very enthusiastic lately, and I come from EPP, so more than average here, to scrap sustainability regulations and sustainability reporting regulations. But we must keep in mind that that's something I communicate on a daily basis with my EPP colleagues, that sustainability requirements, sustainability criteria are a powerful non-tariff trade protection instrument. And they could be used, and I expect they will be used in the near future to protect our European production against Chinese overcapacities, for example.
Thank you so much. That was a very illuminating response. Yeah, certainly very interesting to have this conversation during a time when defense spending is becoming more and more of an increasingly important topic in the mainstream. Everyone, Mr. Radan Kanav, thank you so much for joining us. And I will hand back over to Mihna.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nadia. Thanks a lot, Mr. Kanev, as well. There were a few more questions in the chat, so not sure. Yeah, if you have any time, perhaps we can come to them back later.
I have the time to answer now for 10 more minutes, let's say, or 15. I don't know whether this fits your agenda, so it's up to you.
Yeah, sorry, we're really eating into the next panel, but I'm dying to ask you a couple of questions from here. Sorry, Nadia, but I just wanted to make sure because there were some good questions in here. I think it was one from Mara Roman, who is from the permanent representation of the Commission to Romania, which is asking about your views on the use of the modernization fund for industrial decarbonization. I know we'll speak about this later with our Czech colleagues. And also there was a question from, one second, please. From Carmen Turcu from BASF Romania, who found your replies very pragmatic. And she'll be curious to know what could we do to concretely build up awareness as Eastern European countries as a whole, as a group, I imagine, now that the American administration has made a step back from the region. So how do we increase regional cohesion?
Oh, the second question is extremely difficult. I would say it's about what Europe as a union is lacking the most about good political communication. I have always faced some psychological troubles reading Brussels documents, which made the last 5 years of my life more difficult than years before. But lately, in this political, international, economic situation that we live in, I sometimes have the feeling I'm gonna shoot myself before ending the page. We need to communicate in totally different way, and it's a very difficult thing to do. The modernization fund, it's much more easy question. I don't know what happens in Romania, for example, with the modernization fund, frankly. In Bulgaria, industry has been totally excluded. It's used for good purposes. I'm not criticizing the way money is used, but it's not for industry. This opens a big question. Do we need a more granular funding, like some of the ETS money going mandatorily for industry and others for other solutions? Should it remain a national decision? In my point of view, I like most the models when business is able, industry is able to look for Brussels money in Brussels. I like the InvestEU model much more than the modernization fund model, for example. And I think we should, obviously, this is part of the Commission design. Some people even say the clean industrial deal is InvestEU changed a bit. I would say if the financial envelope is large enough, that might not be such a bad idea.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Kanev. Sorry, Nadia, for stepping in, but I've seen that the participants were really appreciating Mr. Kanev's presentation and answers, and I wanted to make sure that we make the most of the time that he has given us today. Thank you very much. And I think, yeah, you've given some very pragmatic answers, which is probably the way us as a region, but also Europe needs to operate going forward. But there's also some interesting connections there between some of our objectives. And I think you speaking about lead markets for defense and security is something that we need to reflect upon more carefully in the documents to come. But also the fact that, well, there is no financial envelope for the finance of the industrial transformation in the region. Clearly, at EU level, things will go slow. I'm completely on the same page with you on the InvestEU. It's just that it's been a particularly difficult instrument to access sometimes for Central and Eastern Europe, which is because about how business function here, the availability of capital, and so on. But of course, to me, that's another advantage that the Western half of Europe has over Eastern Europe, which is leveraging that instrument far more effectively. Same with IPCIs and so on, than we've been able to do so far. All right, thank you very much for the intervention, Mr. Kanev. We'll return at the end of the event today with the perspective from Romania, from Mr. Spataru, who will be joining us soon. I would like to now move to our second panel, in which we will discuss more about this idea of regional cooperation, perhaps a bit related to the question Ms. Turcu was posing a bit earlier about how do we foster the spirit of cooperation here in Central and Eastern Europe. In this panel, we have some really good representatives of think tanks that are active on the policy process here in Central and Eastern Europe. So we have with us Janis Volbec, who's the Climate Technology and Policy Manager for the Baltic region at Bellona Europa, who's done quite a bit of work on cement in the region, on CCS, and has an impressive track record in public service in the Ministry of Economy, Education and Services. So very happy to have you here. We have Mr. Benjamin Haig, who's the head of the research team at the Institute for Circular Economy in Czechia, INSIEN. After a long career in consultancy, now they're doing some really interesting work on circular economy. I think probably one of the best think tanks working on circular economy for industry in Europe at the moment. And then there's Alexandra Walisewska, senior researcher from EPG, who's been following closely not just what's happening in Poland, but in the entire region. Lead author of a very great report, Industrial Transformation for All. I think you should all look it up. But also has been very active recently on the issues of electrification, and I'm looking forward to discussing a bit about what all that has for industrial transformation in Central and Eastern Europe. But before moving into the panel format, I will give the floor to my colleague, Luciana Miu, who's the head of the Clean Economy here at EPG, and she's the one coordinating most of our work on industrial decarbonization, to give a quick presentation on our take of the importance of regional cooperation and a regional approach for the industrial transition in Central and Eastern Europe.
Thanks very much, Michna. Good morning, everyone. It's been a really interesting discussion so far, so I'll try to not keep you too long from the next very interesting discussion that we're looking forward to. I'm just going to walk you through a quick presentation that presents some of our high-level conclusions from a recent publication. It's a slide deck, which is available on our website, on how we can implement a regional approach to future-proofing industry in Central and Eastern Europe. My name is Luciana Miu. I'm the head of the Clean Economy program here at EPG, and I run our industrial decarbonization work. And in this presentation and in the publication that's related to it, we have an optimistic but cautious thesis, is that Central and Eastern Europe has really undoubted potential to lead clean industrial production in the EU. But at the moment, it's hampered by a lack of coordination across the region. Coordination which would really boost the efficiency of industrial transformation in a time where it's sorely needed, because industry is obviously under significant pressure to transform and also engage in the clean tech race, which is happening globally. So as the industrial policy landscape is shifting a lot, we've heard from Mr. Kanev about the priorities that are coming to the forefront of the EU. CE countries really do need to act now to unlock efficiencies and align their national priorities and ensure that the transformation proceeds smoothly. We've all read, or if not, we're anticipating the Clean Industrial Deal, which does bring some incentives for industrial transformation. It's going to be really key that Central and Eastern Europe can access these and make the most of them. In this presentation, I'm just going to reflect on the benefits of transforming Central and Eastern European industry through a regional approach, which is anchored in competitive and strategic industrial clusters. And just a quick mention that in this publication, we define Central and Eastern Europe as the 12 original members of the Three Seas Initiative. You can see it on the map to the right-hand side. These countries represent a third of the EU's territory, a fifth of its population, but only 10% of its GDP. So let's start with taking a look at the industrial base of CEE and what is at stake for its transformation. So obviously, after 1990, Central and Eastern European countries have become today export-oriented, quote-unquote, factory economies, which have economically important manufacturing sectors, as we've heard before, but also relatively high emissions intensities and significant decarbonization potential for their heavy industry. What's more, manufacturing is expected to grow to 2030, and investment in transport and utilities infrastructure is above EU average in the Central and Eastern Europe region. We'll come back later to why this is important. On the other hand, both human capital and innovation capacity in the region are below EU average, also important, and we will come back to it later. Safe to say that while the current picture of industry in Central and Eastern Europe is complex, there are significant opportunities to reshape it. So EU funding can be accessed, new markets can be launched, and industrial transformation can also become the engine of convergence of CEE states with the rest of the EU, convergence which has been ongoing for some time now. It also goes without saying, and echoing Mr. Khan's comments earlier, that industrial transformation will necessarily involve decarbonization. This is the only way that industries can remain competitive in the face of high energy prices, the global race to decarbonize, and the geopolitical implications of continued fossil fuel use. It will require a massive overhaul to take up new technologies and processes, business models, supply chains, build out new infrastructure, including across borders, as well as design and implement new policy mechanisms, new financial mechanisms to support industrial transformation. And all of this comes with a significant bill for institutional capacity, which is low in Central and Eastern Europe. Now, there are good examples of countries in the region that are progressing their industrial transformation, investing in clean tech. We have great examples from Czechia, state aid programs, also in Romania, massive investments in Polish and Hungarian battery manufacturing, transition plans that have been announced by major steel and cement producers in the region. But overall progress is much slower than in Western Europe. It's obviously hampered by the region's energy crisis, which has forced shutdowns in countries exposed to high natural gas prices. But beyond this recent crisis, there are major bottlenecks that need to be overcome to get industrial transformation on track. And these are driven by issues that we're all more or less aware of, and I wanted to highlight one in particular, which is the relative absence of regional coordination efforts, which can unlock efficiencies in planning industrial transformation. And this type of regional coordination can also ensure more efficient public spending, which is going to be essential given the potential reprogramming of EU funds, which will likely affect CEE countries. We're all more or less aware of this, but I just wanted to take us back here and to reinforce what's really at stake for Central and Eastern Europe. Firstly, the competitiveness of heavy industry will suffer significantly if decarbonization is not implemented. And this is not just to cope with carbon prices, as the narrative has gone recently, but even more importantly, I would say in the long term, to reduce dependence on imports, revitalize economically challenged regions, improve offerings of industrial products, and tap into a market for clean industrial products, but also prevent economic disparities from widening and exploit the relative comparative advantage which some CEE economies still retain in terms of their industrial export competitiveness. But heavy industry is not the only one with this competitiveness at stake, so are downstream industries. And here I've mentioned construction and automotive sectors. For Mr. Kanev's comments in this new world order that we're living in, the defense sector could also be one of those. But construction and automotive are both important and growing in CEE economies, and these sectors can become big buyers of clean industrial products and really get ahead of the curve when it comes to choosing clean products as increasingly required by EU law. And here, green public procurement will be key to launching a market for green construction products, while private sector initiatives and incentives will also be essential for the automotive sector, which is at a critical juncture in the EU and where the ability to compete in new markets is key. But talking about competitiveness, it's not the only element here. We need to pinpoint where to focus industrial transformation efforts, also by looking at the socioeconomic and strategic autonomy aspects alongside competitiveness. And ultimately, if a regional approach to transformation is adopted, the benefits of this transformation can spill over beyond national borders, fostering cohesion and improving the outlook for the CEE region and for Europe as a whole. What also is at stake is the future industries and future infrastructure in the region. When we talk about future industries here, I mean clean tech. And transforming industry in the region also affects the region's options for participating in the clean tech race, which is very much on and could reach significant heights by the end of the decade. It's an important race to be in. Clean tech development brings both economic benefits, but also spillover benefits in terms of research and innovation. And it can also ensure, on the one hand, that CE industries which need to decarbonize have access to domestic clean tech to do so. And secondly, that these countries can become competitive exporters of clean tech. But all these opportunities come against the background of what is really a two-speed development when it comes to innovation, within which the CE region is lagging significantly as far as clean tech goes. We have some good examples in Poland and Czechia, really the front runners in the region, some very promising subnational regions within both these countries in terms of clean tech ecosystems emerging. But to replicate this across the region, national policies will be required, investment will be required, and regional collaboration, again, will be crucial to transfer knowledge. And last but not least, in terms of what's at stake, I want to revisit the importance of infrastructure development for the future as well. Now, this development is already above EU average in terms of investment in transport infrastructure, which is really booming across the CE region, and is only projected to increase in the future. And this is especially true if we consider emerging clean tech production, so new industrial clusters, for example, developing in Czechia, which are driving expansion of its motorway network. And we should not forget the key element, which will be the post-war reconstruction efforts in Ukraine, which would be most efficient and beneficial if led by Europe and the CE region. Okay, shifting gears a little bit now, let's talk about how a regional approach anchored in industrial clusters could help propel industrial transformation in Central and Eastern Europe. So although the map that you see on the right-hand side, which is industrial emissions at European level, really burns red hot in Northern and Western Europe, we can also make out significant clusters of large, heavy industry facilities in the CE region as well. So there are important and sprawling innerland industrial clusters already home to a variety of different industries, which as local agglomerations, they already bring efficiency gains that can be further exploited in industrial transformation. And what's more, these manufacturing hubs are often integrated into regional production networks based on cross-border specialization and vertical differentiation. They already have good cross-border production linkages built in. So it's a good position to start from, but again, a word of caution, because to really exploit the efficiencies and synergies that come from industrial clustering, the CE region needs to progress past the typology of being a factory economy and seriously invest in innovation. Another important aspect here to highlight is the three seas, the Baltic, Adriatic, and Black Sea. These provide access to key trade routes for the region, obviously, and along some of their coasts, we find additional industrial clusters that can benefit from shared infrastructure and resource exploitation, such as offshore wind and CO2 storage in some of these seas. So based on existing industrial clusters, where could the industry of the future be clustered in Central and Eastern Europe? So first off, the efficiencies of clusterization will be important for low carbon industry as well as existing industry, and resource and infrastructure sharing models will really be key. Existing clusters can attract ancillary clean tech industries that provide easily accessible supply chains, for example, low carbon hydrogen production or services for carbon capture, transportation, and storage. They can also serve as test beds for these clean tech industries to innovate, demonstrate these innovations in a real industrial setting. One particularly interesting type of region is coal regions. These have the potential to transform into renewable energy and hydrogen production hubs. You can see on the map on the right-hand side that there's important solar energy potential, for example, in Europe's coal regions, especially in Romania and Bulgaria. Some countries could also become carbon capture and storage or hydrogen hubs due to their natural resources, and new clean tech hubs can emerge. And the potential for new clean tech to come out of Central and Eastern Europe is actually quite high. There were some forecasts that were suggesting that if we are to meet the targets of the Net Zero Industry Act, and based on current market shares, exports of electric vehicle batteries, heat pumps, wind turbines, and solar panels from the Central and Eastern Europe region could triple. And some countries in the region are already exploiting their clean tech potential. But we can do more to get these clean tech hubs to really emerge, strategically placed, and leveraging existing frameworks like projects of common interest, important projects of common European interest frameworks for a regional approach. So based on these current and potential clusters for a low carbon industry, a regional approach to industrial transformation can really unlock efficiencies in planning. A regional approach can ensure the availability of key inputs, for example, renewable electricity, hydrogen, CO2 transport and storage across the region. Just to give an example, up to 19 gigawatts of offshore wind power could be built in the Baltic and Black Seas by 2030, and expanding interconnection capabilities across the region could help channel this produced energy to meet industrial demand across the region. Integrated infrastructure planning across countries, across sectors, also allows for the combined utilization of energy carriers and infrastructures, and it could avoid unnecessary oversizing of infrastructure and help balance supply and demand across the region. We already have some examples of transnational energy projects, including the Wind offshore wind project in the Baltic Sea, the Litpol interconnector, the Black Sea Corridor shared grid expansion project. These are already underway, and they can serve as models for future hydrogen and CO2 networks across the region. When we're talking about a regional approach to industrial transformation, we're necessarily talking about infrastructure. And I wanted to dive a little bit into the three key types of infrastructure for industrial transformation, which are electricity, hydrogen, and CO2 transport. So regional planning of electricity infrastructure can help improve the economics of industrial electrification in a time where energy-intensive industries in the region face some of the highest electricity prices in Europe, as you can see in the figure on the right-hand side. To reduce these energy prices, investment in clean energy sources will be key. And cross-border networks here can help smooth out regional demand patterns, reducing the curtailment of intermittent sources and volatility in power prices. A regional approach can also help reduce the required increase in national transmission capacities, which comes with an expansion of renewable energy capacities. On the other hand, it does mean more storage, and we've already heard about how important electricity storage will be. And it also means more cross-border transmission infrastructure. And there's a question mark on where the funding for this will actually come from. A similar thinking can be applied to the development of low-carbon hydrogen supply chains. Now, because of the absence of long-distance hydrogen transport infrastructure, a first step towards planning should really be the investigation of opportunities to co-locate hydrogen production and consumption based on existing Central and Eastern European industrial clusters before planning a regional hydrogen network. Hydrogen valleys are potential models for developing local networks that connect hydrogen producers, transporters, and consumers. But in the long term, CE countries could be cost-effective exporters of renewable hydrogen towards Western Europe as well. There was one study recently on pathways for European decarbonization that modeled hydrogen export capacities from Romania to Germany of up to 4 gigawatts by 2050. So cross-border large-scale infrastructure will also be required. And here, cross-sectoral, cross-country planning can help avoid the unnecessary oversizing, again, of hydrogen transport and storage infrastructure, which might come from a siloed national approach. Carbon capture and storage is also a key element of heavy industry decarbonization, particularly the cement and chemicals industries. Now, as the potential for CO2 storage and the relevant experience that could help launch it varies across the Central and Eastern Europe region, we will need cross-border CO2 transport. It will be essential, and we'll likely see CO2 storage hubs emerging in the region. A regional CO2 transport network could be more economical than a pan-European network with future interconnection capabilities built in, and really making use of the Baltic, Black, and Adriatic Sea's potential for CO2 storage, as well as the opportunity to aggregate demand for CO2 capture along industrialized coastlines. However, we shouldn't forget that there's some emitters which will need CCS, which are dispersed. This is the case with a lot of cement producers. So regional development of a CCS network, CO2 transport network, should consider as much as possible the co-location of capture, utilization, and storage sites and multimodal transport as well to ensure that there's fair access to a CO2 transport network in the region. Just before wrapping up, I wanted to briefly mention also transport infrastructure as a key aspect of regional planning. So the 3 Cs initiative actually grew out of the importance of north-south transport infrastructure links, which are really key to economic growth across the region. But road and rail infrastructure overall are underdeveloped in Central and Eastern Europe compared to Western Europe, and the development of transnational transport infrastructure can encourage industrial growth through intensified trade, as well as incentivize low-carbon industrial production across the region if environmental procurement criteria and local production criteria are introduced in the production, especially of asphalt, concrete, and steel, which are involved in road infrastructure and rail infrastructure intensively, respectively, for infrastructure development. So just to quickly wrap up, I wanted to leave you with a few final thoughts on what's needed from policy, both at Central and Eastern Europe member state level and also at EU level. Now, firstly, for CE countries, adopt a regional and coordinated approach to clean industry. So by doing this, as we've seen throughout the presentation, CE countries can leverage their comparative advantages, they can unlock efficiencies through resource and infrastructure sharing, and they can support new regional markets. And such a regional approach could and should, in our opinion, be rooted in competitive industrial clusters, also considering strategic issues such as socioeconomic development and strategic autonomy considerations. Align national climate, industrial development, and innovation policies. A lot of policies to bring together, but a great exercise in coherence, which will bring further efficiency at transforming industry. So coherence across national policies will really be key to enable a coordinated approach across the region, as well as ensure investor certainty and avoid inefficiencies in the implementations of siloed policies and incentives. Earmark funds for industrial transformation and deploy new funding instruments. CE countries really must increase their absorption of available EU funding, but they also need to develop their capacity to deploy novel funding instruments. We're talking about carbon contracts for difference, green public procurement systems as a market creation mechanism, blended finance, strengthen climate conditionalities on existing subsidies, and ensure that we're not at the same time implementing distortionary subsidies that are going against some of the other incentives for industrial transformation. Invest in research, development, and innovation, and leverage infrastructure spending as a way of greening in the production of construction products in industries such as cement and steel. On the other hand, recommendations to the EU include, firstly, ensure that the Clean Industrial Deal avoids a two-speed Europe. So the forthcoming Clean Industrial Deal really needs to ensure that intra-EU industrial relocation doesn't occur because of oversized, unsustainable subsidies, which are offered through state aid and in the absence of an EU-wide fiscal redistribution system. Maintain regional development funding and link to industrial decarbonization. So raising the funding that's required for clean industrial transformation will require more targeted and focused use of public funding. And regional development funding is an essential instrument for advancing CE economies, and it should also be leveraged for industrial transformation. And last but not least, strengthen national planning for industrial transformation. This might seem that's something that's just up to member states, but the EU also has a role to play here. For example, it could leverage the future revision of the EU's governance regulation to ensure that member states anticipate their infrastructure, energy, resource, and market creation needs to enable industrial transformation, including through national energy and climate plans, which I know Yanis will pick up on in our panel discussion after this presentation, but also more recently announced instruments such as the Competitiveness Coordination Tool. With that, I want to thank you for your attention. Very happy to take any clarification questions in a couple of minutes before moving into the panel discussion. And as mentioned, the slide deck is available on our website. It's a more in-depth publication that goes a little bit deeper into some of the conclusions I've just presented you. I'll leave it at that and pass back to Mihna. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Luciana. I think that was a tour de force of what we put out in terms of why regional coordination is needed and how we think that can be achieved. Just wanted to leave one more moment, if there's anyone in the audience or even among the panelists, if you have any questions of clarification for the content of the slide deck presented by Luciana. If not, we can move on to the discussion. Okay, so Luciana, you've been crystal clear. Congratulations, especially when managing such a huge amount of topics. But I think you touched there on a lot of important things, yeah, from infrastructure to industrial clusters to how we deal and manage hydrogen, electrification, and CO2. I wanted to give the opportunity to all the panelists to react a bit to what you presented and perhaps maintain a bit their regional coordination lenses. And I'm going to look at Yanis to begin with. And I was wondering whether you could tell us what your perspective is a bit about Luciana's last point on national planning and what's been happening in the Baltics.
Thank you for having me here, and indeed, great presentation, very comprehensive and touching many aspects. Well, one of the slides Luciana mentioned was on electricity prices, and indeed, as industrial companies are electricity and energy intensive companies, from the expense point of view, companies have electricity price plays a great deal. And Baltic states really at the moment lack interconnectivities was, for example, Sweden, where the price usually is much lower, sometimes as much as twice lower than in Baltic states. Speaking of CCS mapping as well, a very good and valid points. I can only agree that if you want to scale up carbon management without cross-border open access, aggregating CO2 volumes, the prices to do this exercise will be much more higher than for Western Europe companies. Thus, again, leaving Baltics or CE companies behind. Lead markets and green procurement is actually very good motivator for example, cement producers in Latvia and Lithuania as not only national rules apply, but also export market governments apply rules. For example, Sweden as one of the countries where Schwenk Latvia exports cement can imply procurement rules that motivates cement company to invest in decarbonization activities such as carbon capture facilities. So in overall, all valid points. I think cooperation is needed among CE countries and to kind of gather those vital points that you brought up that we are actually lacking behind, and we need to find new business formulas, how to combine forces to stay competitive. But I think also it's very crucial to cooperate with Nordic, Northern Europe, Western Europe to still have this knowledge transfer, energy synchronicity, one single market approach, and by that reduce actually regional differences.
Thanks a lot, Yannis. I mean, it's always good when we're in agreement, but it also means that perhaps there's some things we need to discuss more and make sure that yeah, we get it right. I get a bit afraid when I'm I'm gonna ask you something a bit more tricky perhaps, because I know the Baltics are cooperating quite a lot, but you mentioned this cooperation with the rest of the north of Europe, which again the Baltics are doing for electricity, to the west of Europe, where we are seeing significant transformations to their industrial base as well. But referring a bit back to something that Mr. Kane was saying, which is about having not just sort of level playing field, but also some openness towards industry relocating. He didn't quite specifically say that out loud, but I thought he hinted a bit to it. And like, I'm asking, do you think Europe is ready for an industrial map that looks a bit different from the one that we have today? Or are we entrenched into protecting incumbency, which will always come into the way of regional cooperation?
Well, it's slightly difficult to move cement plant that is located close to limestone extraction fields, but it's certainly we cannot exclude that the same goes with steel production and so on. And we had experience when steel production plant has been shut down due to electricity price in competitiveness, let's say. So I don't know. It's a complex question, and right now I think industrial companies do not get into the panic. There is a consistent and pragmatic way how they improve their operations in order to stay competitive with decarbonization, to pay less ETS, to leak less CO2 into atmosphere, to make workplaces even more efficient. Yeah, so I think those companies, especially who has roots or shareholders in Western Europe countries, they definitely have willingness and to some extent possibilities to invest in those processes, but those that are not that they don't have that deep pockets, let's say, for those processes, they might be at risk in this whole turbulent time.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, and thanks for that. It's something that Alexandra and I referred to in the report I was mentioning earlier as well. I think I'll get to that to you, Alexandra, in a moment, but before that, I wanted to turn a bit to Benjamin, to the same, allow him a bit of space to react to Luciana's presentation, but also bring in a bit what's been happening in Czechia. We've seen some worrisome news about Liberty Ostrava selling out the steel mill. It's a country with a very rich industrial history. And getting the transition right in places like this matters quite a lot.
Indeed, yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to join the panel today. So, and for bringing this regional perspective, because it's easy for us to get just because of the complexity of just dealing with it at a national level, so we get stuck in our kind of national bubbles. But yeah, it's very, very, very illuminating to see how this could be better interconnected on a regional level. Maybe, yeah, just to the point about the current status here. Yes, as you mentioned, the Liberty plant is already in the administration process. So that yeah, that basically the writing was on the wall, I guess, in late 2023. There's a view that a sale may be able to go through by the end of this year, but doesn't seem to be much of a prospect that primary production will continue at that site unless something unexpected happens. Yes, yeah, so that's something over half of the steelmaking or primary steelmaking capacity in the Czech Republic that's currently offline and may remain that way. And not so much the secondary production, but the primary production. So yeah, we saw at the end of January that the remaining steelworks, Třinecké železárny, they are now obviously stepping up their communication efforts to draw attention to the fact we're the last one standing in the steel industry here, and from a sort of from a resilience standpoint and from a security standpoint, it's not a good idea to be without a steel industry, particularly an economy which has a strong defense industry as well. That was mentioned. And on the issue of the state aid, then yeah, it's also been a struggle to get investment for energy-intensive industry here. There have been some. They had one investment approved through the modernization fund. They're applying for a new one now, but the major criticism is the slowness of the approval process. Well, both that and also the level of funding. So they observe that in similar projects in Germany, there's a 70% level of funding for the project. They applied for 50%. The project that got approved came back through at 30%. After some changes in the parameters in the interim period. So they're trying to kind of uphold that level for what they're applying for now for the electric arc furnaces. So that's the status in that industry. There's been some closures in the chemical industry too, one of the PVC plants. So yeah, high energy prices are obviously the killer here too. Yeah, so that's weighing on the industry very heavily.
Thanks a lot, Benjamin. Yeah, and indeed, these struggles are more and more common, unfortunately. It's a European problem. We see it also in places like Germany. We've seen what's been happening with the ThyssenKrupp, but also with some of the chemical manufacturers. And the way in which we respond is probably going to have to need a European component as well. And whether we can link it to security, similar to what Mr. Kanev was saying earlier, we can discuss a bit later. But I just wanted to follow up a bit on the question that Mara Roman asked for the previous panel about the use of the modernization fund, because you mentioned it briefly in your comments a second ago, but from the outside it seems like Czechia has gotten that right, because it was a combination of RRF reforms with money mobilized for the modernization fund, which us at EPG, for example, in Romania, have given as an example of a good practice in which you create some administrative capacity and make funding available at the same time in a country where a modernization fund is not being mobilized for industry. So I'm very curious why you said there were problems of slowness of implementation, because we've always regarded it as a good practice example.
Yeah, well, I mean, I should qualify that it's not the main area of our focus, the funding framework. So I can't speak to that in detail. We've been mainly looking at the projects that have directly been supporting decarbonization projects in energy-intensive industry. So there are various projects that have gone ahead, more related to energy efficiency in industry and that kind of thing. But for the sort of hardcore investments, I guess, in the actual production processes, again, maybe it's just a question of relative perceptions. Yeah, but I think if I remember the timing now, they put in the request for that original project two or 2.5 years ago, and they got a final response just a few weeks ago. So, and I see that's. It's one of the things I noted from the leaked document, that there is a reference to simplified rules for quick approval on clean industry state aid framework. So, we hear that repeatedly, that's a real priority to fast track these investments. So that's what I can tell you on that. Certainly the perception is that the process decarbonization investments that have been applied for have taken significantly too long from the perspective of the industry.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. And I completely take your point on simplification as well, which is something we've heard out quite often. It'll be interesting to see also how we move with the acceleration areas for renewables, where we already have an example of how this can be done, but in the leak for the Clean Industrial Deal, the Commission mentioned that only 7 member states have implemented that so far. Yeah, so even when we create instruments like that, the effectiveness of which we still have to evaluate, we're still struggling sometimes to implement. So that I always get worried when we get those type of either hard or indicative deadlines about how quick you need to deal with permitting that we've been seeing in NZIA as well, which my fear is that will create yet another comparative advantage for Western member states, simply because their bureaucracies can handle these types of procedures at a higher pace than the ones in Central and Eastern Europe. But I wanted to turn to Alexandra as well. Final perhaps reaction to what Luciana was saying, but also asking you to bring in a bit the role of the Polish presidency here, and whether there is any space for regional cooperation. But something that I'm curious about as well is that the expectation is that the 40% reduction target by 2040, the 90% reduction target, sorry, by 2040, will be put very clearly in the documents the Commission will publish next week. How does that fare with things that are happening in Poland right now? Is it a discussion that we are going to have under a Polish presidency? What do you think?
Thanks a lot. I think I was going to comment in very similar terms on Luciana's presentation, that we see these barriers across all member states, obviously across all of EU, with CCS infrastructure, electricity infrastructure, and we see it in the answers presented by the EU in the leaks, that the answers to industrial policy challenges and industrial development challenges are addressed in rather horizontal with rather horizontal measures. I mean, especially in the area of electrification policy support, which we'll discuss later probably. Apologies for I'm recovering from bronchitis, but I think regarding this regional angle that you're presenting is really crucial here. And I mean, in the leaks, we haven't really seen much regard for regional aspects of industrial policy and how certain member states will be affected by the barriers that I just mentioned and Luciana presented more than others, simply because of fiscal space differences, administrative capacity differences, as you flagged as well. And I think also what we can see from the leaks is that, I mean, I think in terms of finance, there's sort of, again, repackaging of different funds, or like a PR rebranding, you know, the industrial decarbonization facility. I mean, we're not sure there's going to be any new money at all. That's, you know, for the next months and years to be determined. And in terms of, so beyond the extension of the state aid regime, we're not seeing much. So the fear is obviously that, again, we'll see both in terms of, especially actually in terms of these horizontal measures that I mentioned, that countries with stronger fiscal capacity will outspend countries without it. So in that sense, I think, as you said, bringing in the regional perspective and amplifying CE voices, not just national voices, because we know that there's, as you presented, commonalities between CE countries in that regard, will be, I think, crucial to the success of the industrial deal. And in terms of the role that the Polish presidency can play, I think it's a difficult question. It's a tricky question because, I mean, we know, obviously, I think both in terms of official priorities and sort of potentially behind closed doors as well, definitely security is a key priority, as well as the election coming in May. So definitely the presidency is focused on minor tweaks. I think the 2040 target is still up in the air. I don't know if it's going to be adopted during the Polish presidency. I think it can, but I think it's very difficult to foresee just how much the Polish presidency can sort of allow itself to do. But having said that, I think it would be definitely a great opportunity for the presidency to elevate the voices of CE countries and to elevate the issues that you have presented today, because it will be also a crucial part of things like the MFF negotiations and new cohesion policy negotiations, and setting new priorities for this. And I think it could also be particularly interesting, given that the new MFF will have a slightly different approach with these national plans. So then the regional approach can actually get also muddled a little bit in all of this. Yeah, I think I can't give you a very definitive answer on what the Polish presidency can do, but I definitely see the opportunity here still in the remaining months. And yeah, it would be great to see them pushing for including the regional aspects, the regional CE aspects, more in discussions, which are mainly political still, because the legislative vehicles will come after the Polish presidency. But to really include this angle in discussions around clean industrial deal and so
I
on.
agree on that completely, and I mean, now it's becoming more obvious the role that Poland plays in the region. It's Tusk that gets invited to the important dinners at Elysee, not the rest of us. So there is this perception about leading in Eastern Europe. But something that's very important for the Polish presidency is also how we're handling the next MFF. And you already mentioned a bit the cohesion policy. I'm just curious whether you or EPG in general has any concrete expectations for the competitiveness fund, or do you think it'll be a flop like the sovereignty fund was, which was frankly quite disappointing when we were discussing the Net Zero Industry Act, and there are fears that we'll end up in the same situation in a few months.
Yeah, I think we don't have that much information on not a lot of certainty on the competitiveness fund yet, and I think with lack of certainty on new funding, lack of detail in general, I think it's very difficult to assess. I think sort of assessing the current leaks of the Clean Industrial Deal communication and the other action plans and the framework presented, exactly what is notably missing, right, is the governance aspects for sure. We can get into that later, and definitely joint investment. So I think I don't really have much certainty in terms of expectation of what it's going to be. I don't know if anyone has certainty on that. But I think this would be the level of detail compared to the Clean Industrial Deal communication that we would need, essentially. Because, the Clean Industrial Deal itself, the communication, it's pretty light on the details. I think the content of it is pretty much as expected compared to the mission letters. So again, I think I can just say that we can see from the legislative acts coming out in Q3 and Q4 what will actually happen and what we can expect.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Alexander. I'll get back to you in a moment, but I wanted to speak a bit with Yanis now, because this was an important part in Luciana's presentation about industrial clusters, and there is some experience in the Baltics with Klaipėda and the role of ports. I'm just curious a bit what has worked well and we can use to do at a larger scale in the region.
Right. I paid attention to the map was industrial clusters, and indeed Klaipėda was there, but the main dot in Baltics was around 2 cement plants, and those are the major emitters that actually could be decarbonized to great deal and level with regional cooperation. And there is Baltic CCS Consortium project that received also PCI status and funding for studies, but eventually also infrastructure development in order to aggregate and transport CO2 from those 2 major cement plants to the port of Klaipėda and then ship it offshore. The pity is that due to the regulations, we don't use the opportunity to see if we can store the CO2 locally, and that's another price advantage. So what I would like to do is to use the map Luciana showed with industrial clusters and add another layer was CO2 storage locations. Ideally, we can reduce CO2 emissions locally. That would add greatly for competitiveness of those markets. And I think that applies not only for Baltics, but also from Romania and other countries in the region we are talking about here. So nevertheless, we still right now at Baltic CCS Consortium we are going ahead with CO2 storage somewhere in the North Sea, most likely. And that's fine. We still need transport infrastructure from emitters to intermediary storage locations. But in parallel, I think governments need to work on national legislation, regulations, and explorations, how we can permanently store CO2 as close as possible to major emitters.
Thanks a lot, Yanis. And this is a moment where I wanted to bring back in a bit Luciana as well, because she's been leading a lot of work on carbon capture and storage, not just in Romania, but in the region as well. And I'm curious what your take here is for this opportunity of regional cooperation, especially as with Romania having become the largest gas producer in Europe. It already has a quite sizable storage obligation target under the Net Zero Industry Act. And which is quite evident at the moment that it will struggle to meet through its own means in this very short period of time. So I'm just curious a bit about how do you see the perspectives of regional coordination developing on that?
Yeah, thanks. So it's an interesting question because, like I mentioned in the presentation, my personal take is that regional cooperation will be crucial for CCS. And that's the case not just for Central and Eastern Europe, it's the case for Europe as a whole. And this is why we've seen hubs developing around the North Sea, why we've seen regional infrastructure, regional multimodal transport, because of how expensive it is to do CCS in general. One thing that sort of strikes me, and there was a question in the Q&A, about how Romania has been consistently missing out on opportunities for projects of common interest with regards to CO2 networks, which are still, the take-up of PCI status is still imbalanced between Western and Eastern Europe, but we are seeing more and more projects emerging from Central and Eastern Europe. They seem to be clustered around the North Sea. So I was just quickly checking through the most recent list of PCI and PMI proposals that have been open for consultation. And thank you to Mr. Stoichescu for putting that link in the Q&A. There is a lot from the Baltic states and Poland. And as part of consortia with Central and Eastern European countries, or also involving Northern European countries, so led by Denmark or Norway. And on another hand, we have the Mediterranean Sea. So we have the Prinos Basin in Greece that is starting to pull in CEE countries in the region, like Croatia and like Bulgaria. And there is a big gap where Romania currently is. Romania has not submitted ever any projects for PCI status on CO2 transport. As Mr. Stoichescu was rightly mentioning, there is no plan for developing CO2 transport infrastructure in Romania. And countries surrounding Romania that would be obvious candidates for an eventual CO2 storage hub in Romania, which has the second highest geological storage potential in the region and the second highest target for CO2 storage capacity development in the EU behind the Netherlands. These countries that are neighboring Romania are being pulled into other geographies as far as regional cooperation goes for cross-border CCS. So Hungary is going towards Croatia and the Adriatic Sea with Italy, Bulgaria now towards Greece and the Prinos Basin, Poland and the Baltic states, which was more obvious, I think, as the regional cooperation for the North Sea anyway. So regional cooperation will really be key here, but we have quite stark differences in how CCS is being approached across the region. And Yanis was mentioning also that there are geographies where CO2 storage is actually banned. So this needs to obviously be taken into account. And the major gaps need to be highlighted, because if we're relying on Romania as a CO2 storage hub and as a major anchor of this regional approach for CCS to decarbonize industry, we need to be realistic about where it is at the moment and how much it will take in terms of government capacity, in terms of investment to bring it to where it needs to be. One other thing that I wanted to mention is when we talk about regional cooperation, we talk about trans-border CCS projects, there are also regulatory frameworks that need to be looked at and potential barriers. So we have the London Protocol, for example, that is still a little bit unclear in terms of what it means to transport CO2 across borders. And with the Baltic Sea as well, there's the Helsinki Convention, which prohibits storage of CO2 in the Baltic Sea. So you have this potential opportunity. I know that geologically it's not nearly as attractive as the North Sea, but there still is a capacity for nearshore CO2 storage in Latvia and Lithuania. which is currently out of the question because of the Helsinki Convention. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Luciana. And yeah, that's one of the areas where I think coordination between Central and Eastern European countries has the greatest potential. I wanted to move back to Benjamin to speak about, we spoke again about collaborating on infrastructure development, but then at the same time, we know that through circularity, we can decrease not just energy needs, but also the investment needs and relatively costly infrastructure investments. The leaked Clean Industrial Deal has an entire chapter on circular economy. So I'm curious a bit about what your expectations are for that chapter and what should the EU get right when it comes to industry and circular economy.
Yeah, no, very interested to see that because I mean it's been an ongoing discussion at a national level, but then it was obvious that it was equally true at the level of the EU that there's a problem with the pillarization of policy that it's quite difficult to stitch them together and kind of see the linkages and so forth. So yeah, in the leaked document, whatever one may rate the level of detail and so forth, very encouraged to see that there is this chapter on circularity that in the sort of preamble it says very clearly in bold, circularity will be a priority. So obviously the devil is in the detail. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like, I mean, a lot of the points that are in there are kind of the kind of key issues that we would hope to be addressed. I'd see it in combination with the other chapter, which is on the lead markets, because the two are intimately related, of course. So maybe, yeah, just that the points that kind of stand out for us as being as welcome and important is, yeah, the whole chapter on lead markets, which is about, in particular, the non-price criterion in public procurement. So that's coming up in the revision of the public procurement framework this year or next. But so obviously, a key will be the extent to which that really has sort of teeth, and it doesn't end up becoming a little bit fuzzy at the national level, so that national contracting authorities also have clear guidance on kind of carbon hotspots. There's an acknowledgement there that there's a need to simplify and harmonize the carbon accounting methodologies because there's so many different ones and so many different ways of looking at that. Even if you look at construction, both for say steel and cement, or even how you account for the carbon storage of timber and so forth. So there's all sorts of issues there. Yeah, on the circularity chapter itself, I mean, I suppose the only slight disappointment is that we have to wait until the end of next year to see what the contours of the Circular Economy Act. That's something which seems to be to a large extent unfinished business from the previous commission. So it's an attempt to sort of try to fill the gaps in the regulatory network there. But maybe, yeah, the thing that's just to get to today's discussion, there's a mention of these trans-regional circularity hubs as a specific kind of policy initiative. So I guess it's looking at something similar to the strategic projects for the net zero technologies, but for circularity. So that's definitely a very interesting idea. Smart specialization, economies of scale for recycling, something which happens today at very much at a local level, or there isn't really infrastructure, there isn't scale. So there's a huge potential there. But again, it's not an area where countries are used to collaborating with each other. So how we set that up is going to be a case in point. I guess in terms of areas of application, I know steel companies talk about how to kind of direct the right types of steel scrap to the right types of steel works based on what they're producing, the quality levels. So some kind of exchange there. And also say in the case of the Czech Republic, then downstream in the automotive industry, we see a big opportunity to look much more at the kind of the downstream repair remanufacturing market for the automotive sector and parts as a sort of as a hub opportunity, where clearly the industry here as the number 3 player in the EU could play a leading role. I think you're muted.
Thank you. Yeah. No, appreciate the point and also linking it to the lead markets component as well. It was interesting to see not just the simplification when it comes to accounting, but also the voluntary labels that we'll get for steel and cement. I'm sure it'll give all of us a lot of work for the next half a year or so in trying to make sure that these make sense. Well, the final aspect I wanted to discuss before we move to the conclusion of this panel was Alexandra. About the work that you've been doing recently on electrification. In the leaked CID document, we have a KPI for electrification. Yeah, we moved from targets, objectives, and indicative, obligatory, and so on to a KPI. I'm just curious about what you think we need to get right when it comes to the action plan for affordable energy.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. It's interesting because obviously we were a little bit disappointed, given our work on electrification, that the electrification action plan has been pushed to 2026. But as you mentioned, the energy affordability plan actually does contain some tangible action, tangible KPIs, as you highlighted on these more horizontal issues in tackling barriers to industrial electrification. So, I mean, I can just give you maybe like a quick assessment of those actions in the energy affordability plan, and then maybe I can move on to what maybe is missing, what we would like to see from further action. So, I mean, generally there is a clear narrative as decarbonization and electrification specifically as the only path to lower prices long term, which is very welcome. We have a range of short-term actions. So we have this pilot program with EIB on long-term power contracts for energy intensives, which is very welcome. I think in terms of EIB action, there's some de-risking scheme as well. There's, as you have already highlighted, I think at the beginning today, there's actually explicit action on slashing electricity taxes to the minimum legal threshold. I mean, you can also maybe comment on this because you said you had some conversations already with stakeholders on this specific provision. Which I think all of these, and yeah, again, further recommendations on rebalancing levies and network tariffs for member states. This is all very welcome. This is what we've been pushing for in terms of energy price levels. I think, I mean, another sort of element here that, I mean, similarly to my previous inputs is that, again, like, I mean, certain countries have more fiscal power to create exemptions for industries than others, and necessarily lower network tariffs mean less monetary input to cover increasing system costs and expansion of the grid. So I think, again, the fiscal capacity issue comes into play in here as well. And in terms of the more structural long-term measures, we actually also really welcomed seeing the improvement, the highlighted necessity on improving integrated energy planning and independent integrated energy planning. I didn't dive in detail into that section, but I think this is going to be a really interesting one, and this is something that E3G has been pushing for a while. I mean, obviously, this is a really long-term action. We've been previously talking about potentially piloting these sort of integrated energy planners on a perhaps a more regional level. But I think this is a really interesting action point or KPI as well, and I think especially relevant for CEE, where grid modernization and expansion is still a huge issue. yeah,
Thanks a
I
lot,
know
Alexandra,
we're on time.
for bringing up integrated infrastructure planning, which has to be done not just between energy vectors, but between countries as well. There's a lot of efficiency gains that can come out of there. So I see there were no new questions coming up for the audience. I'll just give each of you 1 minute. There's this question by Vlad Stoicescu, which is about the fact that perhaps it's time to push the narrative towards more the economic advantages of why we're doing what we're doing. Perhaps especially with industry, it's important to understand whether the decarbonization trajectories we are on make sense for the future of industry and its competitiveness, why they do, and how do we move more to that economic security argumentation down the road. So I'll give you 1 minute for that, and perhaps if you want to reflect also on what Mr. Kanev was saying about this tension between the current military charged moment that we have compared to how we approach things in 2019 when the European Green Deal was launched. I'll start with Yanis, then Benjamin, Luciana, and Alexandra, but please be very brief.
No, I think we need more funding than less from CEF, but also national budgets. I think we need more domestically produced clean energy capacities. I think we need interconnections with neighbors in order to synchronize electricity powers and costs. And then we have to also tackle CCS opportunities with local storage locations, exploration, and treat it as actually business opportunity instead of short-term expenses.
Very clear. Thank you. Benjamin?
Yeah, I guess just to speak to what we're mainly focused on, the circularity agenda, then yeah, certainly that's now becoming much more in the mainstream of attention finally, because there are new regulations that are starting to kick in, eco design and so forth. And it's interesting to see, or I'm glad to see that in the leak document, then there's an emphasis on the benefits in terms of waste reduction, lowering production cost, as well as lowering emissions. So it's certainly our intent to make the business case for the circular economy. Obviously, in the short to medium term, there's quite a significant regulatory administrative burden on companies as they switch towards that. So we have to try to sort of underpin that with a positive business case. But also, I think just generally speaking, you alluded to it earlier that I think there was some earlier work by agri-industry which estimated that a circularity sort of focused, or at least underpinned by circularities, a transition would be 30% cheaper than one which relies mainly on these breakthrough technologies. So I think we need to pursue that even if we don't know the benefits, and we'll probably find there are significant savings down the line. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks a lot. Alexandra, briefly as well, please.
Yes, I'll be brief. Our first point on what we would like to see in the coming months and how the Clean Industrial Deal should be improved, I guess, definitely integrating cohesion aspects more into industrial policy. So taking into account regional differences, I think this will be very welcome. And I guess this will also come with further discussions around the MFF and when there's more clarity on the competitiveness compass and new cohesion policy. Second point on the tension between increased defense spending and security as a priority in climate action. I actually don't think there's much of tension. I think actually there could be synergies. So I mean, just looking historically at the history of semiconductor development in the US, coming from the military sector, I think this is actually can be seen as an opportunity, and we should be seeking synergies rather than seeing it as a tension and a barrier.
Appreciate that thought. And Luciana, any final remarks for a couple of seconds?
Yeah, just to capitalize on what Alexandra said about synergies, and in a few words, what needs to come out is also a regional strong market for green industrial products to support construction, automotive, infrastructure development, but also defense. So they can really work together.
Great. So thank you very much, Yanis, Benjamin, Alexandra, and Luciana for this panel. I would like now to move to the final part of our webinar, and I'd like to thank for joining us and for waiting, Mr. Florin Spătaru, and to reintroduce my colleague Nadia Maki for the final bit of the conversation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Mihna. So as mentioned, we are joined today by Mr. Florin Spătaru, who is the Romanian State Counselor to the Chancellery of the Prime Minister and is also the former Minister of Economy. He's currently working on our upcoming Industrial Green Deal. Mr. Spătaru, we know you have a very busy schedule, so thank you for making the time. And just to note that we are live streaming this discussion on YouTube.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to join. I just joined a couple of minutes ago. I have seen also very interesting topics which has been discussed.
Thank you. Just to recap, earlier we spoke to Mr. Radan Canev, who spoke about the changing political landscape and decarbonization in the context of increasing EU defense. We also spoke about how decisions on industrial decarbonization are actually being made at the company level. So during this conversation, we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts about how progress on industrial decarbonization can occur at the EU level, as well as what we're doing domestically at the national level in terms of our national level plan. So to get us started, I'd like to ask you your view on what the biggest challenges facing industry within CE countries are right now, and if you can give us any details about how the upcoming Romanian Green Industrial Plan will address them domestically.
Yeah, thank you. I think the biggest challenge nowadays for CE countries, but not only, most of the European countries, is very much related to the competitiveness. Because we have seen that the decision which has been taken and the current environment brought European companies in a very difficult situation, and we know why. Because we have the war. In spite of what we see positions from the political level, Europe paid the biggest bill of this war, and that has been straightforward reflected in the price of energy. And we know very well that we still have a dependency on the critical raw materials, but at the end of the day, with the materials we have right now, we cannot. European companies they have difficulties on being competitive because pricing in energy is increasing now. Let's say compared with 2019, 3 or even 4 times. And the question is, how can we match these two subjects, the competitiveness and the current environment together? We might say, okay, that we should forget what we have done a couple of years ago, and we should go in the direction where competitiveness is the key, and we don't care about the other things. But I think that's to my opinion, that's the wrong direction. Basically, we have to put our European creativity at work in order to identify what are the solutions to keep the competitiveness, but on the other hand, to make sure that we continue our path maybe in a different way. I think a couple of days ago, there was some information regarding the Clean Industrial Plan, which is going to be proposed by 26th of February, if I'm not mistaken. I had a discussion yesterday with several companies, the largest companies in the steel processing in Romania. And the comment from them was they haven't seen much. They haven't seen more changes into that. And today, just a couple of minutes ago, when we were discussing about that, our European member of the parliament, Mr. Danica, was chasing or asking the Commission, what is the plan for steel? Because we haven't seen much in that. I can tell you that nowadays the steel production in Europe decreased dramatically. Since this would mean that we are going to create another dependency, not from the critical raw materials, but from the base materials themselves. And that should be the way forward, in a way that we have to reassess our position on sustaining what is necessary for our value chains, even by directing funds straightforward in a more flexible way, and even in a more simple way into those areas, with the purpose of decarbonization, and then to assess value chains step by step. And that is something what we have to put forward, and to see in the plan which Vice President of the Commission Séjourné was mentioning, that will be made public in something like 100 days from the date he took over the mandate. We are passing a very complex geopolitical environment, and Europe has to reassess its own position, how to become stronger in the new environment. And I continue to give the example of the shipbuilding sector, which I know very well. In 1980s, it was a proposal to make a shipbuilding agreement worldwide by taking out the subsidies of the governments for this sector. In 1996, it was the first attempt when it was agreed in the OCDE that we should have a shipbuilding agreement. Over the years, 3 times we tried to make this agreement, and every time it was a failure. Europe decided by itself to move on in that direction and take out any state support, any structural incentive for this sector, considering that the other countries are going to follow. At that moment, when the decision has been taken at the European level, the market share of Europe was 28%. Now, in 2025, the market share of Europe is 4%, and nobody followed. This is a lesson we have, and we should think how we are doing in the smarter way, because we know that the Earth is 70% water, and it was not us nowadays, but hundreds of years before, people saying who control the water, control the economy. And this is something what that's what the message, and that's the challenge I do foresee for Central and Eastern Europe companies, but also for other European countries and companies, by let's say mitigating those 2 aspects, competitiveness and the plans. And we really have to make an U-turn into that. Otherwise, by continuing like that, we will just go in a black hole.
It's certainly true that these are issues facing CE countries, and definitely Europe more as a whole. I want to come back to something you said about decarbonizing steel. Actually, EPG recently released a study last year showing that transitioning to green steel would save nearly 1.7 billion euros in emissions costs by 2050. It could potentially actually yield revenue from surplus allowances, not to mention that steel will be critical for defense spending as well. Now, one of the things about steel is that we're going to need large amounts of electricity, and high energy prices have been one of the major barriers to the competitiveness of EU industrial producers. How can we enable an industry to benefit from low-cost renewable energy that we will produce? The Draghi report suggested that the creation of a low-cost generation portfolio for industry, something special and discrete, as well as potential exemptions from network tariffs and certain levies. What's your perspective on this?
Mr. Draghi was right that we should do something specifically for this sector, and not only for the steel industry, but in general for the base materials we are using in Europe, because otherwise will become dependent on that. I can give you my experience and what I have noticed in the Romanian market. It was created a dedicated market for this, let's say, for this sector, by making and by allocating a percentage of the energy from producers directly to this sector. The result was completely unsatisfied. I mean that the producer, so it was, we could not open up a mechanism which will dedicate the production of the energy directly to this high intensive consumers. So therefore, I think it is important to reassess what can we do, maybe at the European level, or maybe more at the regional level. But the bare fact is that the price of energy in countries like France, Germany, or even Spain, it's 3 times lower than the prices in the countries who are at the border with Ukraine. And that's a big problem. And the question is, how are we going to help them? Because the production is not there. The production is here. And this is a discussion we have to make. Yesterday, we touched this point because all these producers, they are paying the green certificate. They are paying all these transport costs. They paying all these things. There is a mechanism for indirect compensation, but apparently it's not enough for them. I don't want to make a very dark picture, but if we are going to lose these base sectors from the Central and Eastern Europe, the whole Europe is going to suffer. And we will not talk about the dependency on the critical raw materials. We will talk about dependency on steel, aluminium, special steel materials, paper, glass, you name it. And that is going to stop all the development projects which are funded at this moment by the European Union, and definitely they cannot go through. And this is something that's something what let's say these companies and we as a country want to see in a document like this clean energy program. And now, and not in half a year time or a 1 year time. They don't have time. They reach the limit of their financing, and this is something which is extremely urgent at this moment.
Thank you very much. So something we spoke about with Mr. Kanev was that in his view, a Green Deal did not actually occur in the same way it should have, because the promised funding didn't properly materialize, and there were some problems with implementation. What should have been different for an efficient and full implementation of the Green Deal? And can we now apply those lessons for the implementation of the Clean Industrial Deal?
As you know, I'm trying to make right now a Green Deal industrial plan for Romania. And that Green Deal industrial plan, working together with the World Bank, knowing the targets which Romania commit to in 2025, different than in 2020 or 2021 or 2022, we will see that the competitiveness aspect is going to be considered. And from my perspective, for Romania, we will make an assessment of the CO2 emissions. How we are going to mitigate that? How competitive can we be? But moreover, to identify possibilities to go in the decarbonization sector, to grow in terms of the economy, but also to reduce the carbon footprint. And another aspect which I'm considering is the trade balance deficit. I think Europe is lacking this kind of analysis. What kind of trade balance deficit do we have in Europe, and how are we going to mitigate that? And trying to put all these aspects together, you can have a plan, because you should not spend money in the directions where you know that you will never be competitive. You should spend money in the area where you know that you are the best performant, and moving forward on creating the value chain within Europe. I think Mr. Letta was right that from Rome to Brussels, to go by train, it will take you a couple of days. And this is something what we really have to realize, because the single market is not acting in the right direction by using the veins and the blood which an economy normally has. And the veins and the blood is the transport infrastructure. And for that, we need cement, we need steel, we need all these aspects. And that's how we anticipate that the Green Deal industrial plan for Romania would look like. 1 year ago, almost 1 year ago, we made an important event supported by the government, by the Romanian government, and it was related to the chemical industry. We know that the chemical industry is the enabler of all value chains in a normal economy. And I do believe for sure in this plan we are having, the chemical industry will play an important role. Because otherwise, we have seen that we are going to import inflation. We are going to be dependent on, let's say, production of other countries, other entities, although now their price is cheaper. But that should not be the criteria we are considering for our competitiveness.
Thank you. It's certainly interesting to see how the competitiveness issue is changing a little bit across Europe, and the discrepancies even within the continent. So I'd like to ask a little bit about what the best options are for financing industrial policy specifically for CE member states. And I guess just to tease out a little bit about what I'm hoping we might discuss is that we know there's a revision to the state aid framework proposed by the Commission. And do you have any expectations on this?
Yeah, I think it was a discussion which was already going on for many years, regarding the flexibility, regarding the permitting, regarding the way of absorbing those money much, much faster. If you make a comparison with the IRA, you will see that the permitting in US might take 3-6 months, while in Europe, on average, it's 18 months. And this is creating a huge difference. Second of all, it was this initiative on creating dedicated funding for this decarbonization and supporting industry in Europe, which in principle it's a good idea, with one aspect: nobody should be left behind. And that is, let's say, there is no straight answer on this dilemma, but this is an answer where this is a topic which we all CEE countries, we have to put on the table. Because otherwise you will find out that there will be created even higher discrepancies between the countries, while we don't use our best technologies, our best things in order to improve that. And I'm coming also from the private industry. Before I've been a minister and going in the public sector, I would like to give examples. And one example is Northvolt. And this is an example where things which are not properly assessed end up in a big failure, a lot of money spent there, while the only company which is now viable for producing batteries, it's in Romania with zero funding from European Union. And maybe that's a lesson to be learned, how we are going to do that in order to properly balance the whole single market.
Thank you so much, and I think that's a really nice example to end on a little bit, to see something hopeful during these more contentious times. Mr. Spataru, thank you very much for your time. I will now pass back to Mihna.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Nadia and Mrs. Spataru. Really appreciate you making the time, and I think you made a lot of very crucial points, and they fit very well with what we were discussing earlier about the need for regional coordination among Central and Eastern Europe to promote some of the interests that perhaps are not reflected very well in what we're seeing coming out of Brussels. We need to cooperate not just on that, but also on building together industrial clusters, regional infrastructure, and responding to this new security-charged environment in a way in which we build our industrial policy in a way that it can contribute to Europe's defense and security. I would like to thank everyone who was a participant and a panelist today. Thank you also to Mr. Kanev, who was here at the beginning with us and giving us the Bulgarian perspectives. Thank you to the panelists, to Benjamin Haig, Yanis Volbets, and Alexandra Valieska. Thank you, Luciana, Miu, for giving the great presentation, and Nadia for moderating two discussions. Thanks for the people who are here with us in the Zoom and asked questions to the participants, but also to the followers on YouTube. We hope to continue similar types of conversation in the future. I think after today, we had a very rich discussion that shows we need to continue these types of dialogues. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.